Captain David Reyes had killed 43 Corvani warriors in his career, and he planned to make it 44 before the day was over. The captured raider sat motionless in the detention cell, still wearing the biomechanical armor that marked her as elite caste, her silence as impenetrable as the reinforced bulkheads around them. "She hasn't said a word since we brought her aboard," Lieutenant Johnson reported, studying the security feeds from outside the interrogation chamber. "3 stun charges to bring her down, and she's been completely unresponsive to standard questioning protocols." David adjusted his sidearm and checked the energy restraints one final time. 23 years of hunting Corvani raiders had taught him that their warriors preferred death to capture, which made live prisoners both valuable and extremely dangerous. This one had been pulled from the wreckage of a scout ship after a brutal engagement in the Centauri debris field, the sole survivor of a vessel that had been stalking human freight convoys for months. "Any identification markers on her armor?" David asked, though he already knew the answer. The Corvani elite erased all personal identifiers before combat missions, making prisoner intelligence a frustrating exercise in piecing together fragments. "Nothing useful. The biosignatures are scrambled, and her neural implants are shielded against scanning. Could be anyone from a clan leader's daughter to a reformed slave soldier." Johnson paused, studying David's expression. "You sure you want to handle this personally, sir? After what happened to the Meridian convoy?" David's jaw tightened at the mention of the merchant vessels that had been destroyed just outside the Vega system, their crews spaced and their cargo hold stripped clean. 47 civilians dead, including children, because human patrol schedules had been leaked to Corvani intelligence. The thought that this warrior might have information about the leak was the only thing keeping her alive. "I speak enough Corvani to make myself understood," David replied, though his fluency in their language came from sources he preferred not to discuss. "And I know how they think." The detention center was located in the most secure section of the UES Valiant, surrounded by overlapping force fields and sensor networks that could detect the slightest aggressive movement. As David approached the cell, he could see the Corvani warrior sitting in perfect stillness, her armored form radiating the kind of patience that spoke of extensive combat training. She was tall even by Corvani standards, probably close to 6 feet, with the lean build of someone who had spent a lifetime in variable gravity environments. Her armor was a masterwork of bioengineering, dark plates that seemed to flow like liquid metal, scarred from countless battles but still functional. Most striking were her ears, elongated and pointed in a classical Corvani style, marking her as someone who had earned the surgical modifications through deed rather than birth. "I am Captain David Reyes," he said in Corvani, his pronunciation careful but confident. "I command this vessel, and you are my prisoner." The warrior's head tilted slightly, the first movement she'd made since capture, but she remained silent. David could see her studying him through the helmet's visor, evaluating threat levels and escape routes with the methodical precision of a professional killer. "Your ship was destroyed, your crew is dead, and you're 300 light-years from the nearest Corvani territory," David continued. "Cooperation will earn you better treatment. Defiance will earn you nothing but pain." Still no response. David had expected as much, but he needed to establish the parameters of their interaction before moving to more specific questions. The Corvani respected strength above all else, and showing weakness would end any possibility of useful intelligence. "Remove your helmet," he ordered, switching to the formal command structure that Corvani warriors used with prisoners. "Show me the face of my enemy." For a long moment, the warrior simply stared at him. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached up and began disengaging the seals that connected her helmet to the armor's life support systems. The process took several minutes, each component designed with redundant safety measures that spoke to the suit's sophisticated engineering. David watched with professional interest as piece after piece of the armor fell away, revealing the battle-scarred warrior beneath. Her skin was pale, marked with the ritual scarification that Corvani veterans used to record their victories, and her hair was white as starlight, cropped short in the military style favored by their special forces. But when the helmet finally came free and David saw her face clearly for the first time, his world tilted sideways. The features were older, harder, marked by years of warfare and loss. The eyes were different too, violet instead of brown, probably the result of genetic enhancement or surgical modification. But the bone structure was unmistakable, the curve of her jaw, the way her left eyebrow rose slightly higher than her right when she was thinking. Sarah. The name escaped his lips before he could stop it, 23 years of grief and guilt crystallizing into a single moment of impossible recognition. The warrior's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those violet eyes, a moment of uncertainty that vanished almost immediately. When she spoke, her voice was rough from disuse but unmistakably familiar despite the Corvani accent. My name is Zareth of the Third Claw. I do not know this Sarah you speak of. But David knew that voice, had heard it laugh and cry and whisper secrets in the darkness of the Kepler colony's long nights. He knew the scar on her left temple from where she'd fallen out of their tree fort when they were 12. He knew the way she held her head when she was lying, the same way she was holding it now. Sarah Chen, he said quietly, sinking into the chair across from her cell. Born on Kepler colony, April 15, 2387. Your grandmother gave you a compass for your 14th birthday, and you gave it to me the day before the attack. You made me promise to use it to find you if we ever got separated. The warrior's carefully controlled expression cracked for just an instant, revealing a flash of pain so raw that David felt it like a physical blow. Then the mask slammed back into place, and she was once again Zareth of the Third Claw, enemy of humanity and prisoner of war. I told you, she said, her voice steady despite the tears David could see threatening at the corners of her eyes. I don't know who you're talking about. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a battered brass compass, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Then you won't mind if I keep this old thing, he said, watching her reaction carefully. Since it obviously doesn't mean anything to either of us. The compass hit the table between them with a soft metallic sound that seemed to echo in the silence of the detention cell. Sarah, Zareth, stared at it as if it were a live explosive, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of 23 years of buried memories. Where did you get that? She whispered, her Corvani accent slipping for the first time to reveal traces of the colonial dialect they'd both grown up speaking. David leaned back in his chair, trying to process the impossible reality of having his childhood best friend sitting across from him in enemy armor. You gave it to me the night before the attack. We were hiding in the old maintenance tunnel under your family's HAB unit, and you said. He swallowed hard, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. You said that if anything happened, I should use it to find my way back to you. Sarah's hands were trembling now, though she tried to hide it by clenching them into fists. The Kepler colony was destroyed. Everyone died. The records show no survivors. I survived, David said quietly. Evacuation ship Phoenix pulled out 36 colonists before the orbital bombardment began. I spent 4 years in refugee camps on Mars before I was old enough to enlist. He studied her face, seeing past the surgical modifications to the girl who had once been his whole world. But you weren't on any of the survivor lists. I looked for you, Sarah. I looked for years. Stop calling me that. The words exploded out of her with the force of suppressed emotion, and for a moment she was 16 again, angry and hurt and trying not to cry. Sarah Chen died with the colony. I am Zareth, war singer of the Third Claw, and I have earned my place among the Corvani through blood and honor. David held up his hands in a calming gesture, though his heart was racing. Okay. Zareth. Can you tell me what happened? How did you survive? How did you end up? He gestured at her armor, the ritual scars, the pointed ears that marked her as alien nobility. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, slowly, she began to speak, her voice distant as if she were recounting someone else's story. I was in the hydroponics lab when the first bombardment hit. The ceiling collapsed, trapped me in an air pocket for 3 days. When the Corvani salvage crews found me, I was half dead from dehydration and radiation poisoning. They enslaved you, David said, the words bitter in his mouth. They saved me, Zareth corrected, though there was pain in her voice. The clan master who found me could have left me to die, or sold me to the flesh markets. Instead, he brought me back to his ship as a curiosity. A human child who had survived what should have been certain death. David tried to imagine it, his best friend, barely 16 years old, alone among the aliens who had destroyed everything she'd ever known. How did you survive? How did you become this? Zaretha's laugh was harsh, without humor. I learned to fight. The Corvani respect strength above all else, and I had nothing left to lose. I trained harder than anyone, fought more viciously than anyone, proved myself worthy of the modifications that mark true warriors. She touched her pointed ears almost unconsciously. It took me 8 years to earn the right to these. 8 years of combat, of proving my loyalty to a species that had murdered my family. But why? David couldn't keep the anguish out of his voice. Why didn't you try to escape? Why didn't you try to get back to human space? The question hit her like a physical blow, and David saw tears finally spill over despite her attempts to maintain control. Because there was nothing to go back to. The colonies were ash, Earth had written us off as acceptable losses, and the only humans I encountered were merchants and raiders who saw a young girl as either cargo or entertainment. David felt sick. Sarah, The first human ship I managed to contact after earning my freedom, Zareth continued, her voice growing stronger with anger, was a freight convoy carrying medical supplies to the outer colonies. I thought they would help me, that they would take me home. Her violet eyes blazed with fury. They tried to sell me to a brothel on Proxima Station. Said a modified human would fetch a good price from collectors. The revelation hit David like a punch to the gut. He'd spent years fighting Corvani raiders, convinced he was protecting innocent human lives, never knowing that his best friend was on the other side of the conflict. The supply convoys you've been attacking. We're carrying weapons to colonies that refuse to pay protection money to human cartels, Zareth finished. The same cartels that tried to enslave me when I sought their help. I've been hunting slavers and criminals, not innocent merchants. David ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the implications. The Meridian convoy. 47 civilians dead. 47 criminals and their families, Zareth corrected coldly. The Meridian was carrying combat stimulants to child soldiers on the Vega frontier. We found the evidence in their cargo holds after we stopped them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 23 years of misunderstanding and misdirected hatred. David stared at the compass on the table, the simple brass instrument that had once represented a promise to find each other no matter what. Instead, they'd been trying to kill each other across the void of space. I kept looking for you, David said finally. Every mission, every planet, every refugee camp. I never stopped hoping you might have survived somehow. Zareth wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar that it made David's chest ache. I used to dream that you would find me. In the early years, when the training was brutal and I thought I might not survive another day, I would imagine you coming to rescue me. Her voice broke slightly. But then I learned what humans really thought of the colonists. How Earth had abandoned us without a second thought. How we were expendable. That's not true, David protested. The government tried to evacuate. 6 ships, Zareth cut him off. 6 evacuation ships for 40,000 colonists. They knew the attack was coming, David. They had intelligence reports, sensor data, everything they needed to mount a proper evacuation. But the colonies weren't profitable enough to justify the expense. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd never questioned the official reports about the colony attacks, never looked deeper into the politics behind the evacuation efforts. How do you know all this? Because I've spent 15 years hunting down the people responsible, Zareth said quietly. Not just the Corvani who pulled the triggers, but the humans who sold targeting data to make the raids more efficient. The politicians who decided that protecting corporate interests was more important than protecting colonists. The military contractors who supplied weapons to both sides of the conflict. David stared at her, seeing not the enemy warrior he'd captured, but the brilliant, determined girl who had once sworn to explore the galaxy with him. "You're not just a raider, are you? You're something else entirely." Zaratha's smile was sad and proud in equal measure. "I am what you humans would call a war crimes investigator. The Corvani High Council appointed me to track down those responsible for the atrocities committed during the colony wars. Both human and Corvani. And now you're my prisoner," David said, the irony not lost on him. "Now I'm your prisoner," she agreed. "The question is, David Reyes of the Kepler colony, what are you going to do about it?" David's comm unit buzzed insistently, dragging him back from the impossible reality of Zaratha's revelations. Commander Patricia Walsh's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp with military efficiency. "Captain Reyes, report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation developing." David looked at Zarath, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I have to go. But this conversation isn't over." "No," she said quietly. "I suspect it's just beginning." The bridge of the Valiant was a hive of controlled chaos when David arrived, with officers hunched over sensor displays and tactical screens painting the surrounding space in overlapping grids of red and amber warnings. Commander Walsh stood at the center of it all, her silver hair pulled back in the severe bun she wore during crisis situations. "What's the situation, Commander?" David asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "Corvani Strike Force just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system," Walsh replied, gesturing to the main display where 6 sleek alien vessels hung against the star field like predatory insects. 3 heavy cruisers and 3 escort frigates. "They're demanding the return of their captured warrior." David felt his stomach drop. "Did they identify her specifically?" "That's the interesting part," Lieutenant Commander Hayes said from the communication station. "They're not calling her a warrior. They're calling her an honored envoy and claiming she has diplomatic immunity under the Corvani-Terran Accords." "What diplomatic immunity?" David asked. "We've been at war with them for over 20 years. "Apparently not," Walsh said grimly. "Intelligence just confirmed that there have been back-channel negotiations happening for the past 18 months. Secret talks between moderate factions on both sides, trying to hammer out a ceasefire agreement." The pieces began falling into place in David's mind, and he realized that Zaratha's presence on that scout ship might not have been as simple as a raiding mission. "Do we know who the Corvani envoy is supposed to be?" "Someone called Zarath of the Third Claw," Hayes replied. "Ring any bells?" David managed to keep his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. "Standard Corvani military designation. Could be anyone." Commander Walsh studied him carefully. "David, I need to know if our prisoner gave you any useful intelligence. The Corvani are threatening to resume full-scale hostilities if we don't return their envoy within 12 hours. She's been mostly uncooperative," David said, the half-truth feeling like lead in his mouth. "But I think I can get more out of her with additional time." "Time we don't have," Walsh replied. "Intelligence wants her transferred to Titan Station for enhanced interrogation within the hour. If she really is carrying diplomatic secrets, they need to know what the Corvani are planning." David felt panic rising in his chest. Titan Station was where prisoners went to disappear, where enhanced interrogation was a euphemism for procedures that left subjects permanently damaged if they survived at all. "Commander, if she really is a diplomat, torturing her would violate every treaty we've signed with neutral powers." "That's assuming she really is a diplomat and not a spy using diplomatic cover," Walsh said. "Either way, it's above our pay grade. The orders come from Admiral Patterson himself." David knew Admiral Patterson by reputation, a hardliner who believed the only good alien was a dead alien, and who had opposed every peace initiative proposed during the war. If Patterson was involved, Zarath was already as good as dead. Permission to continue my interrogation until the transfer ship arrives, David said, hoping he sounded more professional than desperate. If she is carrying intelligence about Corvani capabilities, we should extract it before handing her over. Walsh considered this for a moment, then nodded. You have 1 hour, Captain. Make it count. David made it halfway back to the detention center before his comm unit buzzed again, this time with an encrypted message that made his blood run cold. The text was simple, but the implications were devastating. Zareth of the Third Claw is wanted for questioning regarding 17 counts of treason against the Terran colonial authority. Terminate with extreme prejudice upon confirmation of identity. Authorization, Patterson, Admiral Robert, TCA Intelligence Division. Someone in high command knew exactly who Zareth was, and they wanted her dead before she could reveal whatever secrets she was carrying. David realized that her capture hadn't been a random encounter, but a carefully orchestrated trap designed to eliminate a threat to powerful people who had profited from the colony wars. When he reached the detention cell, Zareth was waiting for him, still sitting in the same position but somehow radiating a tension that hadn't been there before. You look troubled, David. Bad news from your commanders. They want to transfer you to a black site facility, David said without preamble. Enhanced interrogation. You'll be lucky if you survive a week. Zaretha's expression didn't change, but David saw her hands tighten slightly. And you're here to tell me this because? Because whoever ordered your capture knows exactly who you are and what you represent, David said. They're not interested in intelligence or diplomatic secrets. They want you dead. Afraid I might reveal some uncomfortable truths about the colony wars. Zaretha's smile was sharp as a blade. About which human officials sold targeting data to make the Corvani raids more effective. About which corporations profited from the refugee crisis that followed. David sank into the chair across from her, the weight of revelation crushing down on him. How deep does this go, Sarah? Deeper than you can imagine, she replied. The colony wars weren't a tragic accident or an inevitable conflict. They were a business plan. Human corporations needed the resources from Corvani space, but couldn't justify open warfare without provocation. So they arranged for the provocation. By sacrificing the outer colonies, David said, the full horror of it finally becoming clear. By sacrificing expendable populations that were too far from Earth to matter politically, Zareth corrected. The perfect excuse for a war that would open up entire star systems for exploitation. David's comm unit buzzed again, this time with an urgent message from the bridge. Corvani fleet moving to attack position. Transfer window closing in 30 minutes. I have to get you out of here, David said, his decision crystallizing with the clarity of desperation. The transfer ship will be here soon, and once you're on it, you're dead. Zareth studied his face with those strange violet eyes. And why would you risk your career, possibly your life, for someone you haven't seen in 23 years? David reached across the table and picked up the brass compass, its familiar weight solid in his palm. Because I made a promise to a friend once. And because some things are more important than following orders. Even if that friend has become something you might not recognize. Even if helping me means betraying everything you've sworn to protect. David met her gaze steadily. Sarah Chen was the most honorable person I've ever known. If Zareth of the Third Claw is who she became, then I trust her judgment more than I trust my commanders. For the first time since he'd entered the cell, Zareth smiled with genuine warmth. Then we'd better figure out how to get me off this ship, David. Because in about 25 minutes, this is going to become very complicated for both of us. The escape from the Valiant should have been impossible, but David had underestimated both Zaretha's tactical brilliance and the network of sympathizers she'd built within the human fleet over months of careful intelligence gathering. When the detention center's power grid mysteriously failed during a routine maintenance cycle, and 3 security guards happened to be unconscious from food poisoning, David realized that Zaretha's capture had been as much a rescue operation as an intelligence mission. You've been planning this for weeks, David said as they made their way through the ship's service corridors, heading for the auxiliary shuttle bay where a damaged transport waited with suspiciously functional engines. Months, actually, Zareth replied, her Corvani armor interfacing seamlessly with the ship's security systems to open doors that should have remained locked. Did you really think one scout ship could penetrate this deep into human space without help? They reached the shuttle bay to find Lieutenant Johnson waiting for them, along with Dr. Elena Martinez from the Medical Division and Chief Petty Officer Williams from Engineering. David stared at them in shock, realizing that the conspiracy went far deeper than he'd imagined. "How many of you knew?" he asked. "About her real identity?" "Just us," Johnson replied. "But there are a lot of people in this fleet who've been asking uncomfortable questions about the colony wars. Questions that certain admirals don't want answered." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, holding a data pad that showed encrypted communication logs. "We've been monitoring intelligence communications for months. When the order came down to capture Zareth alive, we knew something was wrong. Especially when Admiral Patterson insisted on personal oversight of her interrogation. Patterson's been selling intelligence to Corvani hardliners for years," Zareth explained as they boarded the shuttle. "Not because he supports their cause, but because he profits from prolonging the conflict. A successful peace treaty would end his revenue stream." The shuttle launched just as alarms began blaring throughout the Valiant, but by then they were already clear of the ship's weapons envelope and accelerating toward the Corvani fleet. David watched the human warships growing smaller on the display, wondering if he would ever see them again. "What happens now?" he asked as Zareth took the pilot's controls with the easy familiarity of someone who'd flown similar craft countless times. "Now we finish what we started," she replied. "The peace negotiations have been stalled for months because neither side trusts the other's representatives. But if a human officer and a Corvani warsinger can work together to expose the corruption on both sides." The largest Corvani vessel, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the Valiant, opened its docking bays to receive them. As they approached, David could see the elegant, organic curves of alien architecture that seemed to flow like living tissue rather than mechanical construction. "Will they accept me?" David asked, suddenly aware that he was about to become the first human to voluntarily board a Corvani warship in over 20 years. "They'll accept you because I vouch for you," Zareth said simply. "And because you carry something that proves your good faith." She gestured to the brass compass that David still carried in his jacket pocket, the simple instrument that had somehow become a symbol of promises kept and trust maintained across impossible odds. The docking bay was filled with Corvani warriors, their pointed ears and ritual scarification marking them as elite caste, but David was surprised to see that many of them looked as nervous as he felt. It wasn't until he was standing on the deck of an alien warship, surrounded by beings his government had taught him to fear, that he realized the Corvani were just as uncertain about this historic moment as he was. The ship's commander was an ancient warrior whose ears bore the elaborate modifications that marked him as clan nobility, but his greeting was formal rather than hostile. "Captain Reyes of the human vessel Valiant, you are welcome aboard the Eternal Storm. I am War Leader Thakov, and I speak for the Third Claw in these matters." "Thank you for your hospitality," David replied, grateful that his pronunciation of the formal phrases was still accurate after all these years. Zareth stepped forward, removing her helmet completely for the first time since David had seen her face. "War Leader, I present David Reyes, formerly of the Kepler colony, as witness to the crimes we have uncovered." What followed was the most surreal experience of David's life. Sitting in the conference chamber of a Corvani dreadnought, watching as Zareth presented evidence of a conspiracy that implicated officials on both sides of the conflict. Financial records, communication intercepts, shipping manifests, all proof that the colony wars had been orchestrated by a small group of human and Corvani collaborators who profited from the suffering of both species. "The question now," War Leader Thakov said after reviewing the evidence, "is how we proceed. The moderates on both sides want peace, but the hardliners control the military commands. We bypass the military commands," David suggested, the solution forming in his mind as he spoke. "Present the evidence directly to the civilian governments. Force them to choose between justice and continued war. A human suggesting we work around military authority? Thakov's laugh was genuinely amused. You are either very brave or very foolish, Captain Reyes. Probably both, David admitted. But I've learned that sometimes the chain of command leads to the wrong place. 6 months later, David stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching as the first joint human Corvani research vessel prepared for its maiden voyage. The peace treaty had been signed 3 weeks earlier, after the revelation of the conspiracy had brought down governments on both sides and sent Admiral Patterson and his Corvani counterparts to prison for war crimes. Zareth joined him at the viewport, her appearance now showing a blend of human and Corvani aesthetics as she'd chosen to partially reverse some of her surgical modifications while retaining others. Her ears were still pointed, but shorter now, and her eyes had returned to their natural brown. Any regrets, she asked, watching the joint crew preparing their ship for departure. David considered the question seriously. His military career was over. His former colleagues viewed him as either a traitor or a hero depending on their politics, and he was about to embark on a mission to explore uncharted space with a woman who was no longer quite human but not quite alien either. Just one, he said finally, pulling the brass compass from his pocket and handing it to her. I regret that it took us 23 years to keep our promise. Sarah, he would always think of her as Sarah, regardless of what name she carried, smiled as she accepted the compass, its familiar weight solid in her palm. Better late than never, I suppose. Besides, David added, grinning as the research vessel's engines began to glow with the distinctive blue radiance of a hyperspace drive, we always said we wanted to explore the galaxy together. We just never imagined we'd be doing it as ambassadors for interspecies cooperation. Sarah's laugh was the same sound he remembered from their childhood, bright and infectious and full of possibilities. Ambassador David Reyes. It has a nice ring to it. Ambassador Sarah Chinzareth sounds pretty good too, David replied, using the hybrid name she'd chosen to honor both her human origins and her Corvani experiences. Think we're ready for whatever's out there in uncharted space. Sarah activated the compass, its needle spinning wildly before settling on magnetic north with the same reliable precision it had shown for decades. With this to guide us home and 23 years of experience finding each other across impossible odds, I think we'll manage. As the research vessel New Dawn jumped to hyperspace, carrying its mixed crew toward discoveries that would reshape both species' understanding of the galaxy, David reflected on how far they'd both traveled from the children who had once built tree forts in a doomed colony's hydroponics gardens. They'd found each other again not through grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but through the simple act of choosing trust over fear, understanding over hatred. The brass compass in Sarah's hand caught the starlight streaming through the viewport, its surface worn smooth by decades of faithful service. It had kept its promise to bring them back together, even when the journey had taken them through war zones and enemy territory, through alien modifications and impossible choices. Now it would guide them forward into a future where the children of Kepler Colony could finally explore the stars together, not as refugees or warriors, but as bridges between worlds that had been kept apart by fear for far too long. Some promises, David thought as he watched the stars will past, were worth waiting a lifetime to keep.